Welcome to this class of computer programming. And today in our agenda is a discussion about introduction to computers and programming languages. Now here I have used the word discussion consciously because I do not want it to be a monologue. That means it's not that I will just deliver the lecture over here along with the presentation and you will just listen to it. You are welcome to participate, and from time to time I will be asking certain questions and I expect answers from your side as well. So listen to the lecture obviously carefully, but from time to time do respond. So as I was saying that this is the syllabus for our course computer programming, and in today's class we are looking to cover this introduction part. So as we move forward, first of all, we can, I think, all agree that wonderful invention and its importance in intellectual as well as material progress of mankind is very well recognized in developed countries and developing countries such as ours. And not only that, its importance is underscored more in the current situation, that is the pre-pandemic situation that was prevalent in our society. Computers were being used in almost every field. Just to name a few, we can list them like this. I'll not be highlighting each and every facet of these different domains with discussions about how computers are used in these fields. However, just few of them can be highlighted with respect to the present situation. That means the pandemic situation that we are living in right now. First of all, education. And right now it has become overlapped with the domain that is just mentioned below that, that is communication. If computers were not there, if it was not present in our society, these online classes would not have been possible. Right now, I'm sitting in front of a computer. I'm presenting a PPT or presentation file with the help that is I have prepared with the help of the computer, and the class itself on Google Meet. It would not have been possible if computers were not there. Now, do not discount your mobile phones. Those smartphones are also miniature versions of computers, computation devices. So if you are doing this class on a smartphone, then also you are taking help of a computer. So that is one aspect. The second aspect that I want to highlight is the medical field. The vaccines that we have right now been taken, that people are being vaccinated all over the country, not only that, all over the world. Without the help of computers, it would not have been possible to design, manufacture, and deploy these vaccines within such a short period of time. It has taken only about, from the start of the pandemic, 1 year at the most. Usually, vaccines used to take around 8 or 10 years to come into effect. But this one, on an emergency basis, has been designed, manufactured, fabricated, and now being deployed all over the world with minimum time. So again, that underscores the effect of computers that has been very vital here. And the final point that I would highlight on this particular topic is the weather forecasting. Right now, you probably know that there is a cyclone warning, that there would be a cyclone that would be forming in the Bay of Bengal, and it is likely to make landfall in maybe a couple of days on the coast of Odisha and West Bengal. So how it was predicted? we knew that this cyclone would be coming even before the depression was formed. So that was done with the help of computer simulations, whether patterns were observed and those data were fed into a computer simulation, and that gave us the warning for the cyclone that is about to make landfall here. And you can probably see, if you switch on any news channel, that they would be predicting the path of the cyclone quite accurately. And that, in fact, helps the authorities, the governments and the local authorities, to plan and deploy certain measures in the coastal areas. Warnings can be put out and adequate measures can be taken. People may be shifted to shelter houses and so on. So that is only possible because of the computer simulations, weather models that can predict the future weather pattern quite accurately. This is far removed from the days that weather people used to ridicule weather forecast by saying that if it has been said that it will rain today, then it's probably not going to rain today. That was a very common joke even a few years back. But right now, that's not the case. Weather forecasting has become very precise and accurate because of the help that is gained from the computers. So that probably highlights the importance of computers in the modern society. And if we want to learn about something, a particular topic, it is always a good idea to pose certain questions. And by answering those questions, we gain deeper insight into the topic. So right here, we'll pose 3 different questions. First, what is a computer? Second, what it can do? And the third is how to communicate with it. To answer the first 2 questions, that is, what is a computer and what it can do, we can say that it is a general purpose device that can be programmed to carry out sequential set of arithmetic and or logical operations automatically. So what is a computer? It is a general purpose device. That's it. And what it can do? It can perform sequential tasks of arithmetic nature or logical operations, and it can do it automatically. So that is what it is capable of doing. And the third question in this list is, how do we communicate with it? Now, communication is dependent on language. Right now, I am communicating with you in this particular class. I am lecturing you on certain topic, and you are able to understand that because you know that language. So the basis is the common language. I'm speaking in English. You do understand English, so you can understand what I am saying. So that is the basis of communication. So we need to know a particular language to communicate with the computer also. I cannot just simply say to the computer, do this thing, do that thing, and it will perform them. Unless, of course, you are talking about your smartphone and Siri or Alexa, then voice and voice recognition, voice modulated commands do not work. In general computers, you will have to speak in its own language. And that language is the programming language. So that is the language that the computer understands. So you will have to instruct the computer in that particular language only. So I think that mostly covers the answers to these 3 questions on a basic level. But now let us look at history of computers. Now, another question that we can pose is that, is computer a modern invention? So what do you think? Is it a modern invention? Any answers? And if it is a modern invention, when did it get first come into say, in our society when it was first implemented?
Sir, I mean, I don't think it's a modern invention.
It's not a modern invention.
We can,
Why not?
we can say, uh, like abacus is a very
Quite correct. Absolutely correct. Abacus is a computing device also. So please go on. You were saying something.
I don't know exactly when it was invented, but it was like, I think,
prehistoric
among
times.
the,
Yeah. So
yeah.
Babylon and Roman Empire, when it was there, the abacus was being used.
Yes, sir.
So you are quite right in that it is contrary to popular belief. Computers existed in ancient times as well. Not in this form. Obviously, it's not like your iPad or Dell or HP computers or laptops that you have right now. But they did exist. Those were mostly analog computers. And one can say that any tool that is used for calculations, in other words, computations, could be referred to as a computer. Now, this particular word computer was first used by an English writer. I'm not sure about his name, but could be Richard Braithwaite or something like that. He was the person who first used this term. He coined this term computer. But obviously, it did not mean digital computers or even analog computers. What he meant was human computers. The meaning of the word at that point of time was some person or persons who carried out calculations or computations. And this meaning continued till around mid-20th century. From that point onwards, computer as calculating machines was the more meaningful word. However, you must consider, as one of your friends just now pointed out, that even before the word came into existence, there were certain aids, tools, or devices to help in computing. They did exist, and that indicates that history of computing is definitely far longer than the history of digital computers. Digital computers are in existence from around 1950s. But computing devices were there from the 9000 BC. This is probably the first instance of a computing or a device that helped in computations, making calculations. The Ishango bone, that is a form of tally stick, looks like this. This is the original specimen that was recovered. And there are marks on this bone, marks such as these. They are quite similar to tally marks like that. We are all used to apply these tally marks to calculations. So this group of tally marks means it's 5, or the number 5 is represented by this tally mark. Similarly, these tally marks represent 19, 17, 13, and 11, giving us a sum total of 60. By the way, here one interesting point, do note that here all the numbers, that is 19, 17, 13, and 11, they are prime numbers. So there is a school of thought that around 19,000 BC, people were aware of prime numbers, but there is some controversy related to it, because prime numbers are very much related to the concept of division. Now, concept of division came around 10,000 BC, 9,000 BC, around that time. So it's unlikely that these were put down as examples of prime numbers, but still they are definitely examples of certain computations or calculations being made. of some sort, but we do not know exactly what. If we move on from there, next we have something called the hippo. It's around existed around 4000 BC in the Inca Empire in South America. It's nothing but a knotted string, and it was used for counting. So the knots usually represented numbers, and those knots are provided at a predefined location. So there were knots representing tens, knots representing hundreds, thousands, and so on. So at the 10th place, if there were 4 knots in that zone, that particular domain, then it would mean a number 40. You can probably see along these strings, there were knots that are made. So each of them represent different tens of numbers. Then we have the abacus, used in arithmetic or simple calculations in Rome or Babylon. There was also the swan pan, that was the Chinese abacus, as shown in these figures. The first mention of the Chinese abacus is around 2nd century BC, but that does not mean that it was not in existence before. That was the first documented mention. Moving on from there, this is a very interesting device. I don't know whether you have heard about this, but the Antikythera device, which was built in around 125 BC. This is probably the earliest mechanical analog computer to exist. It was built in the Corinthian colony of Syracuse, and it used to calculate astronomical position. That means those heavenly bodies that are visible in the night sky. It was capable of predicting their positions. And it used a mechanism, quite complicated and complex mechanism of differential gear, and was capable, as I said, of tackling the positions of various different constellations that are visible on the night sky. It was discovered in 1901 in a shipwreck of the Greek island of Antikythera, and hence its name, the Antikythera device. Now, complexity of this mechanism was such that its inner workings are not yet clear to us, but devices of such complexity would not be seen for more than a few centuries after this. So as we can see that in antiquity, there were quite a lot of different computation devices or computers. So these are basically analog computers, but quite clearly, they are not what we mean by computers at this present time. At this present time, we mean that computers are digital devices. So modern computers are all electronic digital devices. And those computers had a beginning in Charles Babbage's difference engine. That was the first computing device. Babbage also conceptualized an analytical engine, which was a successor to the difference engine that was capable of performing simple mechanical calculations. But he also proposed an analytical engine. It was supposed to be a mechanical general purpose computer that incorporated an arithmetic logic unit, control flow in the form of conditional branching, if-else statements, loops, as well as integrated memory. Even to this day, all the computers that we use actually follow this logical structure. All the modern electronic digital computers use this organization for their design. But what happened was that Babbage was unable to build this analytical engine because at the middle of the 19th century, the fabrication technology was not that advanced. So this machine, the analytical engine, would have required thousands of parts, and all those thousands of parts would have had to be handmade. The figure that you see here at the bottom, this is the part of an analytical engine that was built by Babbage. But he could not complete it because obviously funds ran short, and finally he had to abandon it. Probably this particular machine was hundreds of years, at least 100 years ahead of its time. And almost to prove that correct, in 1941, world's first working, programmable, fully automatic digital computer was developed by Konrad Zuse. This was an electromechanical device, and it was developed in Germany. So if you notice the time, this was at the height of World War II. And when Zuse built his machine, he was not supported by the powers that were at the time running Germany, that is the Nazis. They believed that this is not going to help their war effort. So there was no funding for it. So obviously Zuse could not commercialize his product. Another interesting information about this is that the original Z3 machine that was built was destroyed in the bombing of Berlin. That was around 1943. Originally, his machine was called V3. However, later on, the name was changed to reduce confusion regarding the German rockets. That is, I don't know whether you know that Germans used to have a class of rockets called V2. So V3 could have been misconstrued as something to deal with the next version of that kind of a rocket. So that was the reason why the name was changed to Z3. Anyway, the Nazi Germany did not use these computers to help in their war effort, but the Allied forces did. And during World War II, mechanical computers were used for specialized military operations, such as, say, in code breaking. And during that same period of time, first electronic digital computers were being developed. Do note that Z3 in 1941 was the electromechanical version of the computer. First electronic computers were also being built around this same time.
Sir, can I add something?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
During this World War II, there was the German encryption machine for delivering the messages called Enigma.
Yeah.
That was like one of the most encryption. The encryption was the first, that was the concept of encryption.
And it played a very big role.
Yes, so that helped England win the war.
That breaking the Enigma code was done through mechanical computers. People could not break it. Means the computation power that was required to go through that level of encryption that was provided by the Enigma machine, Germans thought that it was unbreakable. But using computers such as the Colossus, I'll come to that just in a minute, and there was a program called BOMB. That was a Polish scientist, I'm forgetting his name. He was the one who first proposed the BOMB machine. And based on that,
So
Alan
yes,
Turing, exactly. Alan Turing built his model in Bletchley Park in England. And these machines, Bomb and the Colossus machine, these were the precursors to the modern computers. And this is the electromechanical device used by the British cryptologist to help decipher the German Enigma machine encrypted messages during World War II. So that was the bomb version of the machine. There was also the Colossus. And this was the first electronic digital programmable computer. That is the electronic version. Z3 was the electromechanical version. Colossus is the first electronic version of the digital programmable computer. And this was also developed in Bletchley Park, where all this code breaking was going on during the time of the World War. The Americans also built ENIAC in 1945. ENIAC is an acronym. It means Electronic Numerical Integrator and Computer. Its computation capability was such that it was demonstrated. It was a public demonstration that it calculated a trajectory in 30 seconds. And the equivalent or the equal amount of computational tasks performed by a human being took 20 hours. So that was a demonstration of the computation power of ENIAC. And these sort of machines were the predecessors of our modern computers. But again, these machines were originally huge. They required huge amounts of power to run these machines. And their sizes were as big as large rooms. So quite away from our portable devices. But anyway, these are the ancestors of the modern computers. Now let us come to computer systems. Now computer systems, as you can probably imagine at this point, there are three different types. One is the analog computer. These analog computers work on principle of measurement. That is, they measure a particular change in some continuously varying parameter, and that is basically its purpose. And those are called analog computers. Analog computers, as we have seen, have been in existence from prehistoric times. One example you can see mentioned here is the thermometer. It measures the parameter, which is temperature. Its counterpart is the digital computers. These are the computers that we see in our surroundings at this moment. These are the things that we mean by computers at this point. So as already mentioned previously, these are general purpose machines that work on the principle of counting. Their functions are to accept discrete numbers as input, perform certain operations on those numbers, and produced some discrete numbers as output, and those outputs to be displayed in a given format. Finally, we also have hybrid computers. These have the capabilities of both analog and digital computers. For example, in case of real-time applications such as space vehicles, when it is in motion, so it has to correct its course in sometimes. That means if it is veering away from its given path, then it has to measure by how much it is moving away. And that is done with respect to some prefixed coordinate system. And then on the basis of how much that deviation is, it has to decide how much counterforce has to be applied in which direction to correct that course. So those are real-time applications and those are hybrid computers. But for now, we'll only concentrate on digital computers and look at its functions and organization. Now, as mentioned in the last slide, a digital computer essentially performs only 3 tasks. First is accept data as input. Second, process that data by performing desired arithmetic and or logical operations. And once the processing is done, output that data in a desired format. So input, processing, and output. These are the 3 basic functions performed by digital computers. And its organization is such that it is capable of performing these 3 tasks. So you must have an input unit and you must have an output unit. The function of the input unit is to accept data as well as instructions, and quite obviously the output device communicates the result to the user in a given format. But it is not possible to go from directly input to the output. That's not possible because there has to be certain operations, desired operations performed in the middle of it. So in between input and output, there exists another unit that houses a memory unit that stores data and instructions received from the input unit, or it may also store intermediate as well as final results. So memory unit must be present. Along with that, there has to be an arithmetic and logical unit. This is the heart of the computer. It contains the processing device that is capable of performing arithmetic operations and making certain logical decisions. Along with these two, there is a control unit that controls the sequence of different operations taking place within the computer. So this is the controlling device to coordinate the sequence of different operations. So you have an input unit, you have the processing unit that constitutes the brain of the computer, you can say, and it has got 3 different units in this processing unit: the memory unit, the ALU or arithmetic and logical unit, and the control unit. And finally, there is the output unit. So how data flows from one side to the other? From input, it obviously goes to the memory unit. The memory unit, it works as a, you can say, numbered baskets. So you take an input, take a number, and put it in an addressed, predefined location. That is how the memory unit works. So as the location is addressed, you can then later on use that address to retrieve the data and perform operations on it. So from this memory unit, the data can go to the arithmetic and logical unit. Once processing is done in that particular unit, that is in ALU, it goes back to the memory unit and gets stored in a different location or maybe in the same location, depending on the operation. Data can flow to the control unit as well. So not only data, signal can also go from one unit to the other. And obviously, these controlling signals would originate in the control unit. And on the basis of these signals, the sequence of operation is controlled. And finally, from the memory unit, the data goes to the output unit to be displayed to the user. So all of this together makes up the organization of the digital computer. And it is quite similar to the analytical engine that was proposed or conceptualized by Charles Babbage. That is why he is known as the father of modern computers. So here the black arrows indicate the data flow between different units, and the red arrow indicates the control signals originating in the control unit and going to different units to control the sequence of different operations. The processing unit often is referred to as the CPU, the central processing unit, and it comprises of, as already mentioned, the memory unit, the ALU, and the control unit. So we have here 5 functional hardware units. So these are the hardware part of the computer. But only the hardware is not sufficient. What you need along with it is the software. So what is the software? These are basically a set of instructions, usually package programs, that control the behavior of the hardware. And it is required to utilize the hardware efficiently. And quite often these programs are designed by computer experts and usually provided by the manufacturers. One major aspect of this software is the control program. You know it by the name operating system. Most of us usually use the Windows operating system, but there is the Mac, and there could be the Linux operating system, and so on. Different operating systems are there. Its sole purpose is to act as the control program to the computer. And under its supervision, all other programs would be executed. So this is the operating system is basically the interface between the user and the machine. As soon as you switch on your computer, the operating system would be booted first. And that is where you come to the desktop. And that is the main interface that you work with. From there, you can move on to different parts of your computer, start different programs, run different games, or you can log on to internet. So everything that is done on the computer is done under the supervision of the operating system. If the operating system gets corrupt, your computer would become defunct. Now, quite obviously, the complexity of the operating system depends on the requirement of a particular computer system. Think about your phone. Your phone also has, the smartphone obviously has got an operating system as well. It could be Android. If you are using an iPhone, then it's an iOS software, but mostly we use Android phones. And those operating systems keep getting updated from time to time. Why the upgradation? Because tasks according to it are getting more complex from time to time. A few years back, a phone was capable of placing a phone call only. Right now, you have your camera on the phone, you can have internet surfing on the phone, you can run games on the phone. So obviously the tasks are becoming more complex day by day. And to counteract that, obviously the operating system needs to get complex as well. So that is one aspect of the operating system. What are the other programs that can run on the computer apart from the operating system? These could be certain application programs. You can run Word, MS Word, or Excel, or PowerPoint. You can run MATLAB, which is a very specific software for matrix calculations. You can also watch movies using some video players. Apart from that, there may be certain compilers that can run certain programming languages. Now, altogether, the hardware, that is those 5 functional units, and the softwares, including the operating system and other application softwares, programs, they make up the computer system in its entirety. Now, in the previous slide, I have just mentioned certain compilers. Compilers run programming languages. Now we have to focus on what a programming language is. If we go back to the first slide, we had proposed or posed 3 questions. The last of which was, how do we communicate with the computer? The answer to that question was through programming languages. So let us now, in just a bit more detail, learn what actually is a programming language. We have established that computer is a wonderful invention. It can do many things, but what it cannot do is think for itself. So it can only understand what to do when it is told the problem and its solution, how to achieve that. It cannot obtain the solution by itself. So you have to define the problem in precise and unambiguous terms, and then also provide the, one can say, how to obtain the solution. So provide that as well in step-by-step manner. So the sequence of the steps to perform to obtain the solution, to solve a problem, that needs to be told to the computer as well. It cannot do that by itself. So how do we tell the computer? You have to use a particular language that is understandable to the computer. So we need to take help of the programming language, which is nothing but an artificial language, means it is not a spoken language, that can be used to control the behavior of the machine, specifically a computer. And this programming language is defined through certain syntaxes and certain semantic rules. And these rules define the structure of the program and how it derives its meaning from the given instructions. So basically, this is a collection of instructions that is capable of performing specific tasks when executed by the computer. Without these programming aspects that are provided to the computer, it cannot function properly. So you must know the language of the computer, that is the programming language, to communicate with it effectively. And there are 3 different classes of computer languages, that is programming languages. And these are the machine language, the assembly language, and the high-level language. So there are 3 different classes of programming languages that we can think of. First of all, let us look at machine language. So this is the lowest level of abstraction in case of programming languages. It is a system of instructions and data directly executed by the computer's CPU. By the way, the programming language is understood and executed in the brain of the computer, which is the CPU. So a system of instructions and data directly provided and executed to the computer CPU is known as the machine language. As already mentioned, that this is the lowest level of abstraction for representing a computer program. What is this language? This is basically a string of zeros and ones. So those strings, number strings containing zeros and ones only, tell the computer what to do. So instructions are different bit patterns, strings of binary bits. Here binary bits means 0 or 1. And one part of this binary bit tells the computer what operation to perform. The other part of this binary bit instructs it on how to take the input or from where to take the input. That is to find numbers, data, or operands on which the operation is to be performed. Also, it instructs the CPU where to store the results. Now, this is not very easy to learn. Just writing zeros and ones in a sequence is not only difficult, it is also tedious and time consuming. Because this is not natural to human beings, we are used to natural languages, spoken languages or written words. So just by looking at zeros and ones, it is impossible for us to tell what is being said to the computer. And it is prone to mistakes as well. So this is not a, you can say, good alternative to speak to the computer. But the problem is, computer only understands these bits of bit patterns. So it only understands zeros and ones. So there is a problem. The problem is still magnified by the fact that a program developed to be executed in one computer cannot be executed in another computer because the architecture of the two computers may not be same. And hence, a program developed in one may not work in another computer. So there are quite a lot of disadvantages to the machine language. But undeniably, machine language is the form that the computer understands. This is also a low-level language, just like the next class of programming language, which is known as assembly language. This is also a low-level language. Here, the representation is usually defined by the hardware manufacturer. Hardware manufacturer means, remember those 5 functional units. So those are manufactured by a certain manufacturer, and that manufacturer provides the assembly language. Now, this assembly language is based on certain abbreviations that helps the programmer to remember individual instructions and memory locations. For example, one can use add for addition, sub for subtraction, and so on. So here you do not have to write down strings of zeros and ones. So what we can do is use certain symbols or abbreviations. Now, right away we see a problem. We know, that is, as humans, we know that add stands for addition. But does the machine know? The machine will only recognize zeros and ones. It is not going to recognize add for addition. So how to bridge this gap? There are certain utility programs known as assembly that usually translate the assembly language statements into machine code. Machine code means strings of zeros and ones. So the problem is equivalent to maybe 2 persons who do not speak a common language. So what is required is an interpreter, someone who will translate the language between those two people. So the translator usually knows both languages. So here, the utility program, known as the assembler, that performs the task of the translator. So it will take those abbreviations and mnemonics that are used for writing the assembly language program and translate it into strings of zeros and ones. That is the machine code. And this machine code then can be fed to the target computer. Again, this assembly language is computer specific, or to be more precise, computer architecture specific. If the computer architecture changes, the program that works on one computer will not work on the other computer. So these two, that is machine language and assembly language, are low-level languages. But it is also difficult to write programs in assembly language. The answer to communication with computers lies in high-level languages. In high-level language, we more or less use the structure of, say, English language and common arithmetic operations. So these are abstract programming languages which are much more easier to understand, use, and more importantly, these are portable across different platforms. So one program, it works on several different computers. As already mentioned, these closely relate to terminology of simple algebra and English language. So that is why these high-level languages are easier to understand for human beings and also easier to code in, write programs in these languages. High-level languages are closely related to the terminology of mathematics, simple mathematics, as well as English language. So it means that it is much more easier for us humans to not only understand this language, but also write down instructions in this particular language. We do not have to use abbreviations here. We do not have to use, luckily, the strings of zeros and ones here. We can use simple English words as well as simpler rules of mathematics and apply the rules of algebra to write down programs in high-level languages. In that itself, it makes it much more easier. But the problem remains that it is easier for us to write and understand and instruct the computer. But how does the computer understand this terminology of simple algebra and English? It cannot understand that. It can only understand the machine language, that is zeros and ones. So again, we require an interpreter, or to be more precise, a translator. And these programs, these specific programs that translate the program written in high-level language to the machine language is known as the compiler. So what is a compiler? A compiler is a program that translates source code from a high-level language to a lower-level language, such as the machine language. There is a counterpart for compilers as well. It is known as an interpreter. Interpreters directly execute instructions written in a programming language without requiring compilation. That means here, in case of interpreters, there is line-by-line execution. Suppose you have written a program of 10 lines, following all the rules of the and semantics of the high-level language, following simple algebra and the terminology of English. In a particular high-level language, you have written out a program 10 lines long. So what the compiler would do is it will compile the entire 10 lines at one go. So it will go through the program written in high-level language, line by line, and it will create something called an object program. Sometimes in your computer, in your hard disk, you will find certain files with .o extension or .obj extension. Those are object programs or object files. So once that is done, then that object file is run to execute the program. In case of interpreter, that does not happen. It does not create .o files or object files. It will go line by line and execute the commands line by line. So there is a slight difference between a compiler and an interpreter. But the primary objective remains the same. Translate something that is written in a high-level programming language to the machine code, so that the instructions given in the high-level language could be executed by the machine by reading the machine code. So that is what a compiler does. Now, what are the certain examples of high-level languages? A lot of them are there. Fortran, COBOL, ALGOL. There is C, C++, Pascal, is MATLAB. And there may be certain other examples of high-level languages also. But right now, what we are interested in is the language of C. That is what we'll learn in this present course of computer programming. So that brings us to the close of today's lecture. Thank you.